Hello, everyone. I'm Fran Strickland, and welcome to Tapped In with Verolead Biz Solutions. Here on this platform, we are really focusing on bringing to our audience insights, concepts, and ideas that help them continue to grow and evolve, not only in their businesses and professions, but also personally. And today I have a fantastic guest that I think for those of you who are really into building your businesses will truly appreciate. I have Vanessa Thompson with me today, and she is the founder, the managing director of the Sustainability Experts. And today she's going to be talking to us how innovation, how you develop the culture, the sparks, those insights that really can transform your business from simply existing to being a powerhouse in the marketplace where people thrive and are bringing their best ideas forward. Vanessa, thank you so much for being with us. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much. And thank you for that lovely introduction.
Well, it's not difficult to share what I've shared because innovation is one of my first loves. So if
Mm,
I were to talk about my profile is well, it's a thruster organizer innovator.
mm,
So you can see
mm.
that there's kind of like an affinity towards someone who's doing work in this space. But we really want to capture, really optimize our time together. So we're going to get started. So
Yeah.
why don't you start out by sharing a little bit about yourself, okay? And how did you arrive uh, at what you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started out working in Silicon Valley and Silicon Valley startups, and I'm born and raised in Silicon Valley. And so that's probably led to a lot of my philosophy surrounding a lot of this work as well, too. I started out working for a NASA biofuel startup. It was originally a NASA-based technology, and it spun out to become its own venture. And I helped them raise for a few years, and then I ended up working for larger organizations like the UN Foundation, the World Bank, and the Nature Conservancy. And then, of course, a few other startups as well too. It's inevitable in Silicon Valley. A few SPACs like Joby Aviation, which is electric eVTOL or eVTOL, if you're familiar, or kind of similar to electric helicopters. So all sorts of different technologies that I was working with, and then a few venture capital groups as well after that. And the whole kind of way that I got into this is I had done a few papers at UC Berkeley, and a publisher reached out to me and asked me to write a book on innovation. And particularly, what are some of the kind of main drivers behind innovation? What makes a particular venture much more innovative than the next? What's the formula? What is the differentiators behind this? And I think a lot of the audience here is curious about that too. How can we come up with the next big product? How can we develop new IP? How can we bring our teams together so that they can actually function together as a lean startup mindset? What is it about certain organizations that are able to harness that rather than organizations that are not able to harness that? And so that kind of launched me into this whole research project, which was the book. And I'm somebody who's very case study based. I want to see the evidence. So I developed the book all around case studies, over 60 organizations that had gone from being not necessarily the most innovative to being very innovative organizations. So they made that pivot. And it's a
Mhm.
documentation of those 60 organizations that were able to transition into that. And I'm somebody who always likes to see the evidence, what worked and what didn't. And especially when you're running a business, I believe it's really important not just to see the theoretical research, but to see what actually was implemented and successful. So that launched me into all of this speaking, and of course, Sustainability Experts, which is a consulting organization that helps businesses with that. And our podcast as well too, which we have kind of great innovators come on. We've had everyone from Olympian Venus Williams to we've had some CEOs come onto our podcast as well too, each taking a very different take for what are the practical business strategies for how we can create new products, new revenue streams that make sense.
Mm. So you had a foundation from working in that environment. I mean,
Mhm.
as you say, you're in Silicon Valley, and that is kind of innovation haven, right? So you're there, you're working, you really draw from the environment, you work in it, you're evidence based oriented. So
Mhm.
it's just kind of like a natural a progression for you to come to a place where you're taking what you have learned and you're now bringing it to the larger community, society, to
Yeah.
help really build that same type of thinking.
Yeah.
Now, is it correct when I hear that from your perspective, innovation is available across the board, anywhere?
Yeah, absolutely.
What would you say then is, and I know you're going to give us some pointers about how to build this in organizations, but tell me, what are some of the fundamentals for people who are called upon to lead or to nurture these environments? What orientation or mindset should they bring to the
Yeah.
table to get started?
Absolutely. And this is fundamental. We're thinking about how do we initially start this? We all want this, right? We're dealing in competitive marketplaces where we have to develop new products. We have to be creative. We have to be, at the top of our game. So, how do we develop both a culture and an organization that's able to develop IP faster, able to bring talent together quickly? How are we able to do that? Well, the first and foremost, what you have to think about is your mission. And this is something that I think is really the epitome of what we consider to be the Silicon Valley mindset, which is you normally think of maybe a small team, maybe 10 to 5 people of brilliant engineers working out of their mom's garage with this unparalleled motivation towards a mission that's going to completely disrupt an industry, right? We always think about that when we think about an innovator. And this is something that's really, really important is that you have to have a really, really key mission that's above the organization itself. It's something that's going to drive you, that even if you get a pay raise from your next competitor to work there, you're not going to switch because the mission itself is so important and it brings all those people together. And so that's something that's really, really important and something that I've seen across all the case studies of my research as well too, is you have to have that organizational mission that brings everyone together, almost kind of a moonshot mindset. When you think of the early days in the moon mission itself, you have all of those people so incredibly compelled towards that mission. And one great example of this is a company called Interface. Interface is considered to be one of the most innovative organizations in the United States, but they didn't start out that way. They're actually a carpet manufacturer that's in the South in the United States. And this is not a particularly industry that you would think of as being innovative. You don't necessarily think of a carpet manufacturer, it's a very traditional business model.
Mhm.
And they were already a public company at this time. And they were also a non-sustainable organization, shall I say. They used a lot of, plastics. They used a lot of oil and petroleum to produce a lot of their products. And suddenly, they decided to completely switch. Their founder and CEO, Ray Anderson, said, "You know what? I completely want to change this business model. I want to become restorative, which means that I want to give back to the earth more than I want to take." And this was a completely, complete pivot from where they were. But what was interesting is that when they went down this road, they actually survived a lot of recessions that their competitors didn't. They were able to bring talent from all around the world who was so wonderfully excited to work for this organization. Their patents now are in Gucci and Adidas and a lot of big brands. So a lot of their fabric patents are very rare that are much more sustainable patents. So it really brought together all of these incredible engineers in a way that they wouldn't be able to do otherwise. And so I think something when we're thinking about, for anyone in the audience who's listening, how do we create that innovative mindset so that we can develop new products faster, is you really have to think about the mission. What is the mission beyond the organization that's existential? That's existential for you and your team, because that's what's going to bring people together to work the long hours, to think outside the box, to be so almost kind of obsessed with finding a solution to each and every one of these products or solutions to that problem. They're going to be motivated to do that only when they have a really core existential mission. And I'll just share one other example that I think is really interesting that illustrates
Please.
this point. There's this one doctor named Dr. Chisty, And he had a very, very difficult problem. He worked for a hospital that was not very well off or in a well off community, and they weren't able to buy all the necessary medical equipment they needed to be able to save lives, particularly with infant respirators. So, if an infant gets pneumonia, they need a respirator to breathe, and it's very, very expensive. It can be anywhere from 15,000 to 20,000 US dollars. So, it can be very expensive for hospitals that don't have those resources. And because his hospital couldn't afford that, he saw so many infants die in his arms and he could do nothing about it. And so he had this incredible motivation. And he figured out a way to make a respirator, instead of being $20,000, $3. And he was able to come up with this incredible invention in a market of respirators, which is a multi-billion-dollar industry with plenty of brilliant doctors out there. But only he was able to create this incredibly disruptive technology that not only was more affordable, but reduced infant mortality by 70% in his hospital, which was truly, truly incredible because of that unparalleled motivation. And so, something that we're thinking of when we're thinking about what is the formula behind innovation, you have to have this really obsessive drive towards finding that solution that's truly existential. In each and every one of the cases that we've seen incredible motivation to change how things are. And that's not just going to come from necessarily, okay, we have to develop a new product, we have to stay on top of it. It really, really has to be an existential drive.
Wow. So how I describe what you just said is, sometimes people say, I want to be the best in the world.
Mm-hmm.
I want to produce something that is best for the world, that is good
Mm-hmm.
for the world.
Mm-hmm.
So it really does transcend, just kind of the things that we face day to day in our businesses. Yes, we want to have new products, we want to reach new markets. And that's all good because that's also part of bringing good to the world. But
Mm-hmm.
it really is an inside job, something that's really bubbling up and inviting people to personally decide that they are going to go beyond and they're looking
Yeah.
for ways to do that. That's fantastic. Now, that's really in my sweet spot. I love that. Now, so we've talked about that's a fundamental. What
Mhm.
else? What else do they need to bring to the table? And what about the people in the organizations themselves, the team members?
Yeah, absolutely. So the next kind of step is once you've found that motivation for your team, and it can be anything that really compels you and your team members. There's actually another very interesting and surprising aspect towards what you need to think of next, and that actually is a constraint. So innovation needs constraints. You cannot have a huge budget and a ton of time and think that you're going to think completely outside the box. There has to be something constraining you that forces you to think outside the box as well too. And in the example of Dr. Chisty, he had a constraint, and that was cost. He could not use all of the resources in the world and all the money in the world to develop the most expensive device to save lives. He had this cost constraint. And that actually was really, really fundamental to his innovation process. And the reason why it was is because he had to throw out the old playbook entirely. He could not use the same resources that these other doctors were using. So he had to completely go back down to the fundamentals. What works? What is a respirator? How do the basic dynamics work? And what resources do I have at my disposal that can meet that solution? And when you have that, that's where you really get that disruptive innovation, when you throw out the old playbook and you have to completely create something from scratch. So what's something that's really important for all innovation teams is to have a constraint. Now, you don't want to just have any constraint. It has to be purposeful. And there's, limitations on what kind of constraints are important. But those constraints are very, very important to guide and to focus your attention onto what really matters. And so when we're seeing, innovation and innovation strategy, a lot of people say, okay, well, let's just come up with a new product. That's really broad and that's really vague. But if I were to just give a simple example, if I want you to write, a really great piece of literature or a poem or something like that, I don't just say, write a great poem. I say I want you to write this very specific poem. I only want it to be this many words. I only want it to be on these certain topics. And suddenly it gives you constraints to actually be creative within that constrained space. And some of those constraints can really, really guide us. And a lot of major organizations use this strategy. So, one great example is Disney. Disney is a very creative organization. They come up with great storylines and great movies and things like that. And one of the ways that they're able to do this is they actually create a structure for creativity. And the way that they do that is they actually have different meeting rooms in their offices based on what type of creativity you're going to be talking about. Meaning, if you want to have a crazy, wild idea, off the wall, kind of completely wild idea, there's a special meeting room for that. Then there's another meeting room for curating all of those ideas and prioritizing which ones we're going to choose, and another one for execution. How are we actually going to implement that idea? And what's great about that is when you bring the team together, you actually book a specific room depending on the topic. So if you want to have that crazy, innovative idea, you have a special meeting room for that. And people that come into that meeting room are ready to hear it. They're ready to hear that crazy idea. They're like, okay, we're going to talk about crazy ideas in this meeting. So I'm ready to listen to that. I'm not going to just dismiss it. Now, when we're really down to business and implementing that solution, everyone needs to focus, and they need to focus on how are we going to take this idea to execution. And so everyone's ready for that. So it enables people to be creative and create a structure around that and not have people shut down those ideas that might be a great idea, but they're simply busy trying to execute, right? So it gets everyone on the same page. And so creating a structure within your team, creating a structure within the prompt are really, really important for focusing creativity towards something productive.
Wow. And that goes hand in hand with what I talk to my clients about how structure and systems really are not hindrances, but facilitators of excellence. That's
Hmm.
fantastic. And I love that Disney. Now that tells me, I'm asking myself, how can I create somewhat that same thinking when I'm connecting to people, my clients, or even, just exploring with them, what might be a solution.
Yeah.
Now, is there something that you would tell the audience today that they need or would be fantastic for them to remember if they really want to take this to heart
Hmm.
and demonstrate it, show it, let it show up in what they do day in and day out? What would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of people who might be listening to this, they might be feeling kind of a lot of frustration when it comes to developing new products, developing new IP, maybe even frustration within their teams as well too to get their tasks done. We all have that. And of course, in this competitive marketplace, we're certainly seeing more and more competition, more and more pressure, squeezing margins. There's a lot of pressure on the teams and on the organizations. And so what is kind of some lasting advice that can help you through a lot of those challenges? And one of them is listening. And this is kind of a surprising one, but a huge part of innovation is listening to all of your stakeholders. Some of your best ideas will come from truly and genuinely listening to each and every person that's connected with your organization. And I'll give you just a brief example on why that matters. There's a great organization called Red Sea Global, and they're a hotel development chain. So that means that they go in and they develop a grand, beautiful hotel in a new location. And before they did this in this one particular location, they decided to listen to the community, the people that live in that particular village, before they came in and started developing. And they said, we're going to give them whatever they want. We're going to come in and we're going to ask them and give them what they want, which is something that's not typically very usual for a hotel development change, but they wanted to do something new. And of course, when you listen, the kind of key piece that you have to remember is that it's always going to be a little surprising. And so you have to be very, very open minded in those initial days. And they said two things that were very, very surprising. And most businesses might just walk out of the room if they heard this, but they didn't. The villagers said, we want a banana farm and we want sailboats, our traditional sailboats that we really prioritize and love in our community. And any other business would say, well, that's great, but that's not really what we do. But they said, no, we're actually going to listen and we're going to connect that with our business model. We're going to take this quote unquote wild idea, according to most businesses, and we're going to connect it with the core business model. So they did invest in agricultural land and they created a very unique farm to table experience for all of their hotel guests. They also did invest in sailboats and even trained the locals on how to ride those sailboats. And now they have a very unique sailing experience that's a part of their hotel chain that you can only get at this particular hotel. And now people all over the world will travel to this particular hotel to have a very unique sailing experience that you can only get at this particular hotel. Now, what's interesting about this is when you first listen to that idea, it sounds wild, it seems completely unrelated to the business model. But they were able to find a bridge between, okay, what is that idea that's listening to my stakeholders? And what is my core business model? And how does that business model and that profitability overlap with that particular idea? And it created them such a competitive advantage in the market that you're not able to replicate this. Their competitors are not able to replicate this. And so when you're frustrated and when you're trying to listen to everyone, remember that you need to think about your core business model. You need to overlap that with what you're listening or what you're hearing from all your stakeholders and find the bridge. And that bridge is a key spark for innovation and your competitive advantage in this very competitive marketplace.
Wow. Now, isn't that fantastic how you start with something very, very basic? It sounds basic, it sounds easy, but actually listening and filtering out, first of all, who really are your stakeholders?
Yeah.
Okay, that's a big start. But then filtering out all the other noise and
Yeah.
saying, okay, how can you make that overlay? And you know, the thing that I want to really call out is that it's not free flowing. It's not just pulling stuff out of the air and you know saying, okay, let's go do it today. Let's come up with some new ideas. It really is a systematic thinking about how to make that happen. And that ultimately you can build capability, but it takes this awareness of how
Mhm.
to do it. And this is something that people can gain by working with you. And with that note, because guess what? When you're having fun, time flies. Vanessa, tell the audience how, if they really want to know more about how to innovate and how to bring that magic to their organization, how can they reach you?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm always interested to talk with people or just learn from them as well too. You can reach me on my LinkedIn page, which is Vanessa Thompson. I also have my website, vanessathompson.com, if you want to book me for workshops or speaking or keynotes or things like that. And then the Sustainability Experts also has its own website, which is the sustainability-experts.com. And you can feel free to reach out to both of us, the organization and myself, on LinkedIn, and would be happy to start a conversation with you.
Fantastic. And folks, what will happen is when we go live with Vanessa's conversation with me today, we are going to have all of that information so that you can connect directly with her, included in that release in the comments section. So don't worry, you'll have a chance to be able to reach out to her directly and bring that spark into your organization. I mean, really, I would love to hear from all of you to hear exactly how you've applied what you've heard today from Vanessa. So that's it for now. Vanessa, thank you so much for
Thank
being with us. To my audience, thank you for joining. I'm Fran Strickland. I have Verolead Biz Solutions, and we're all about helping small and medium-sized businesses to get to predictable performance and profits through systems, taking out the chaos in their execution and money flows in their businesses. So thank you again, everybody. Have a fantastic day, and we'll talk soon.